I'd like to take a moment to thank the QCGN for helping EPCA put this together. So, hi, I'm Catherine Korakakis, and I am the president of EPCA. So, the English Parents Committee Association is a coalition of parent committees of Quebec's English school boards. It represents nearly 100,000 students in the young Anglophone sector. EPCA is a nonprofit, volunteer-run association funded by the Ministry of Education. EPCA advocates for public education in English in Quebec and lobbies for questions that concern the members of our parent committees. So now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Marianne Sandilands, who was born in Montreal and spent her formative years in Hemingford, Dunham, and Chambly. She is a graduate of McDonald-Cartier High School in Saint-Hubert, now Heritage High School, which is part of the Riverside School Board. She completed her undergraduate and law degree at McGill University. After her call to the bar, Marianne served as a law clerk of the Supreme Court of Canada. She now practices law at Conway Litigation in Ottawa. Marianne has appeared before the Supreme Court of Canada on matters of constitutional law and teaches Canadian federalism law at the University of Ottawa. Thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
My pleasure, Catherine. It seems that I've been completely upstaged by another guest speaker. Who is that?
This is my dog Rainbow, and he wouldn't stop biting my toes, so I had to lift him up. So this is Rainbow, everybody.
Well, he can listen to my spiel until he gets bored, which won't take long. Hi, everyone. I wish I could see you all in person, but we're relegated to Zoom, which is great because we're all in different places. As Catherine said, I'm a graduate of the English public school system in Quebec and also English CEGEP in Quebec and McGill University. I'm also a parent now. I have my own kid in grade 1, and he's in the French public system here in Ontario, where I'm based. So I'm actually now a big proponent of minority language education in all its forms in all provinces. And just as a matter of public information, I'm a lawyer. I'm called to the bar in Ontario. And I have a restricted permit to practice in Quebec. So that's how I'm able to bring you this presentation this evening. So I've been asked to give a presentation on Bill 96 and how it affects parents, particularly with respect to obviously education issues and also health and social services particularly. I'm going to give a big kind of high-level overview of Bill 96 in general, and then I'll zero in on those two topics, and then I'll touch on other things as relevant. And I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So there is a Q&A function. You can put your questions in anytime you want, and then they will be brought to my attention at the appropriate moment, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. And if I can't answer them all, I'm happy to follow up afterwards. I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions because it's a big topic. I do have a PowerPoint, which I'll use sort of here and there. But I think the idea is that you can get a copy of it afterwards as well if you want more details. So before I launch into the meat, I think I'll just give a quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with the QCGN, the Quebec Community Groups Network, it's a nonprofit organization. It was founded in 1995, and it's a group that links more than 50 English language community organizations across Quebec. And they've been very busy over the past year or so advocating for the English speaking community with respect to Bill 96 in particular and all that's been going on around that. I serve as the legal counsel for the QCGN, so I've been providing them legal advice on Bill 96 and also federal legislation and all things language and constitution, which has been a busy time the last 12 months. So I will just show you my agenda for tonight. See if I can get this up and running. Okay. Yes, you see my outline? Thumbs up. Catherine, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see it? Okay, great. So this is what I propose to do in about 20 minutes to half an hour tonight and leaving time for Q&A. I want to give a high-level overview as what is Bill 96? And then secondly, dive into how does Bill 96 affect health and social services in English? Thirdly, how does Bill 96 affect education? And I'll talk about primary, secondary, but also CEGEP, which is the big looming topic. Fourth, what is being done and what can we or you do as parents? And then finally, as I said, open up the floor to Q&A. No problem. Should be easy. So diving in, what is Bill 96? Where to begin? So on the slide is the title of the bill, An Act Respecting French, the Official and Common Language of Quebec. So this was a bill that was tabled in the National Assembly in May of 2021, and it was passed, so adopted into law in about a year after that in May 2022, is now law. What is it? It is an overhaul to a provincial law called the Charter of the French Language, which we might know better as Bill 101. So that law, the Charter of the French Language, has been law in Quebec since 1977. It's changed several times over the years. It's been challenged. Parts of it have been modified. But Bill 96 is sort of, how can I put it, a rewrite of the Charter of the French Language. Kind of doubles or triples the size of the law and makes it a lot stronger. What else is Bill 96? It's not just an overhaul to that law. It also makes changes to about 24 other provincial laws and 2 regulations as well. So it touches on a lot of different other pieces of legislation. What else is Bill 96? It also adds an amendment to Canada's Constitution. Up until Bill 96, this had never been attempted before. And what else is Bill 96? Bill 96 also has shielded itself with the notwithstanding clause. So you may have heard a lot of talk about that. But that's a device that was also used in Bill 21. And the idea there is that the legislation operates notwithstanding the Charter, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So it's attempting to shield the legislation from constitutional challenges based on human rights. So that's a lot. That is a lot. I have told everyone, I know this is the most large and sophisticated and complicated piece of legislation I've ever seen. And it's dense, it's hard to understand, and not many people have really ever sat with the bill and read it because it's not accessible, really. So on this slide here is my list of topics that Bill 96 covers, and it's quite broad. So it covers access to justice, access to services. Oh, that's actually 2 topics. Access to justice is one topic, and then the second topic is public sector, access to services, and health and social services. Another topic that it covers is access to municipal services. Another topic is requirements for French in professions in Quebec. So that's all the professions. Touches on education. It touches on French in the private sector as well. It also adds a lot of powers to the Office Québécois de la langue française for monitoring and search. And finally, there's a whole host of constitutional issues in Bill 96, which I'm not even going to talk about tonight, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I actually did a full presentation for the QCGN at a town hall on Bill 96, and there's a link here. And if I feel very industrious, I'll try to drop it in the chat or the Q&A, but if you have a copy of this, you can find it on YouTube. There's a full presentation on the whole bill. So I'm not going to duplicate what's there, but you can watch that on your own time. So the real questions we're honing in on tonight really are at the bottom here. What's the effect of Bill 96 on the vitality of the English-speaking community? And more particularly, how does it impact you, your children, and their future in Quebec? Whew, those are big, heady questions. And I'll say, when we talk about Bill 96 now that it's the law, we're mainly talking about what it did to the Charter of the French Language. So we're mainly, when we say, okay, Bill 96 requires this, what we mean is the Charter of the French Language, as modified by Bill 96, now requires this. That's usually what we mean. Okay, I'm gonna stop my share. Go back to me. So my next big topic is, how does Bill 96 affect health and social services? I'll get into this and then I'll talk about education. So this question has been asked many times by many people. It is extremely complicated. And as I said, Bill 96 is a big monster, and the health and social services piece is probably the most complicated to answer. The million-dollar question is, does Bill 96 restrict health and social services in English? The sponsors of the bill said it doesn't. It's not meant to, and it doesn't. My answer, having studied the bill, is yes, it does. And I'm not the only one. I'll explain why it's complicated, and then I will throw out a challenge to all of you. So we know in Quebec, there are protections or rights to health and social services in English. They're set out in some legislation. There's also this idea of designated bilingual institutions. So certain hospitals or service centers are designated bilingual. We know that. That hasn't changed. None of that's changed. But around that, there's a complicated system to ensure that English services are actually provided through the system of access plans. And that system of actually how those English services are actually provided is created and it is a creature of the Minister of Health, and it exists at the pleasure of the minister. And things don't always pan out the way they're planned anyway. So even if the plan says there's supposed to be English services, you don't always get them at the end of the day. So it's already kind of a complicated quagmire to begin with. That's before Bill 96. And those of you who probably live in different regions of Quebec have experienced probably the shortcomings of the existing system. Now, we add Bill 96. What does Bill 96 change in the system? So I think the most important thing about Bill 96 is that, so in the pre-Bill 96 world, there were rules about requirement to use French in the public service and in all kinds of things. But there weren't really restrictions on using other languages, including English. So it's like you have to use French, you can use English, but you also have to use French, kind of thing. But under Bill 96, the logic changes radically. The new default rule, as the general principle in the public service, is that French is to be used exclusively, so only French, except in defined situations where you are, as a civil servant, permitted to use another language, including English. So that really changes the logic, and it changes the basic rules for all civil servants to follow. Now, Bill 96 also sets out a whole bunch of exceptions, and I'll talk about a couple of them. And that's the reason why the sponsors of the bill say, no, we worked it in, nothing actually changes. But I'll explain why I don't think that's actually true. So for example, the rule is French only and then exceptions. One of the exceptions is that public servants are permitted to communicate in English to people who are eligible to receive education in English. And another exception is they can communicate in another language to newcomers for the first 6 months that those newcomers are in the province. You may have heard of those exceptions. Those have made the news because both of them are problematic and under-inclusive. So I'm sure everyone on this webinar knows that people who are eligible to receive education in English, it's a very specific category of people, and they have their eligibility certificates. And sometimes there's, you fall through the cracks because your parent wasn't a Canadian citizen and all that kind of stuff. So there are lots of people who would normally want services in English who don't have those eligibility certificates for a number of reasons. So there's a disconnect between what perhaps the government thinks is, someone who would require service in English, and then the actual population of people who would want services in English. So that's one problem. Anyway, so this whole framework, it's not even clear what this applies to. There's been many, many debates as to, does this apply in the health sector? Does this apply to a doctor and a patient? Does this apply to a psychologist? Who is restricted by these rules? And the answer is far from clear. It appears to only apply to written communications and not oral, but then there isn't another set of rules that applies to oral communication. So it's really not clear what set of rules a civil servant is supposed to apply. And that's, I think, the source of a lot of confusion and, frankly, anxiety among English speakers about what are the new rules and how am I going to experience the healthcare system next time I walk into a hospital. So it's really not clear how this rule is being applied. And there's stories coming out, right? We hear things, but I think there's a lot of work to be done to actually understand what's going on in the system and on the ground. And for those of you who are using these services, what is your experience? And have you noticed anything in the last, 9 months that's been different? There's also a lot we don't know, because a lot of these new rules are going to roll out through regulation and policy, and some of those regulations and policies haven't been made yet. So we don't actually know what some of the concrete day-to-day rules are going to look like. But beyond that, there's a general sort of, I would say, chilling effect that we're expecting from Bill 96, from another series of rules. And so, for example, even the idea that a public servant or a health and social services employee needs to be more careful before they switch into English, because they have to, kind of verify, am I allowed to be using English in this instance? There's actually new sanctions for public servants who break the rules and who speak a language other than French when they're not supposed to. There are new restrictions on hiring so requiring knowledge of English in hiring civil servants and social services employees. You have the institution has to justify why they need someone to have a competency in a second language, for example. These kinds of things we're expecting are going to create a chilling effect through the system. But again, we don't really know. We have to see how it pans out. So again, there's 296 of you. I'd be really interested to know your experiences. But I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of documenting this. Anyway, all this to say, how does Bill 96 affect health and social services? There's a lot we don't know yet. I'm expecting it to have a chilling effect, but there's a lot that's not known yet. And I think it's a really important time to be vigilant and watch closely and see what's really happening, but ask critical questions too. So that's my spiel on that. Next, I wanted to, and of course, I'm happy to answer questions if you have some. The next topic I wanted to talk about is education. So Bill 96 and education. So first, primary, secondary education, and then I'll talk about CEGEP. So for primary, secondary, this was actually sort of one of the lighter parts of Bill 96. There actually wasn't a lot of changes in the primary secondary system. The main one has to do with our friend eligibility. So already we know in Quebec, under Bill 101, the Chart of the French Language, eligibility to attend English schools is restricted to people who fit this criteria of eligibility. So where the parents are Canadian citizens who are educated in English in Canada, etc. I'm sure you're all familiar with those, because to attend English school in Quebec, you need the eligibility certificate. That has not changed. That's staying the same. What's changing is there are also some exceptions to that. So you're allowed to attend English school under a temporary permit. For example, if your family is in Quebec temporarily, there are ways to get a temporary 3-year permit so that you can send a kid to English school. Those permits used to be renewable, and under Bill 96, they're not going to be renewable anymore. So there's kind of a 3-year cap on how long a non-resident can send their kid to school in English. So that's the change we see. What's going to be the effect of that change? Well, obviously, a decreased access to the English system for kids who are in Quebec temporarily. They'll only be able to attend English school for 3 years, and they'll either have to attend French school or move out of the province. So we're also expecting this to cause actually a bit of a chilling effect for businesses to be able to attract people from overseas who are English speaking and want to send their kid to English school. I'm also wondering if we're going to see an effect on the vitality of the English public school system, it overall, as we all know, the system is under severe constraints because of the eligibility restrictions. And is this going to create that further kind of squeeze on the system, restricting enrollment? We'll see. In terms of language of communications from the school board, I've gotten a few questions over time with this one, and this is another tricky one where the devil is probably in the details. And actually, Catherine's nodding, so Catherine probably has more knowledge of this than I do at this point. But my understanding is there's some new rules, new restrictions about using French exclusively in certain communications related to non-pedagogical services. From
So for
what
instance,
pardon me?
So for instance, what the government has explained to us is if a school board would want, let's say, to communicate with Learn, right? Because that's a separate entity, a legal entity, or perhaps if they wanted to communicate with the teachers union, that's a separate legal entity. Communicate with EPCA. These are the questions we've asked. We haven't gotten answers with, but what they've told us is if it's two separate entities, then under the law, yes, you're only communicating in French.
In French exclusively. So there you go. So one English-speaking organization communicates with another English-speaking organization, must communicate in French. If that's, that sounds like that's what they've told you. I haven't done a deep dive into this. My understanding is that school boards can still communicate with parents in English. But yes, as you said, it might affect school boards' communication with other entities. So for that, I would say ask your school board what they think they're allowed to do. But I'll also note that I'll get to this later in the presentation, but the English Montreal School Board has challenged parts of Bill 96, and they have challenged a number of these provisions because they regulate the language that an English school board is allowed to use. And so there's a constitutional basis to challenge those, actually, but I'll get to that later. It's cool stuff. So moving to CEGEP. So there are, I think, three big things we see in Bill 96 in terms of CEGEP, and I'll try to explain them as clearly as I can. They are very confusing. Okay, so the first thing we have is we see for the first time a designation of CEGEPs as either English-speaking or French-speaking institutions. That's new, that didn't exist before. So the English CEGEPs that we all know they've never been designated differently, but now they're designated English language institutions. Now for the English language institutions, they are going to be subject to a cap on enrollment. So I think it's capped at 17.5 of the entire CEGEP population. So basically those institutions collectively will be able to accept no more than 17.5% of all CEGEP students. Inside that enrollment cap world, those institutions are supposed to give priority in their admissions to English eligible students. So students who have eligibility for English primary and secondary education. They're supposed to give priority in admissions to those students. And though that's supposed to be done at the institutional level, each CEGEP is supposed to have a policy as to how they're going to give priority to those students in their admissions. What does this mean in practice? I have no idea. Maybe CEGEPs have started developing these policies. I'm not aware of them. I'd of course be interested if anyone is aware. This new system, this cap with the priority admissions to English eligible students, is supposed to come into effect in July of this year. So we'll see. I've heard some very concerning things about sort of CEGEPs not being set up for this and not going to be ready in time. And I don't know, but that's what's coming. So what's going to be the effect of that? Again, some big questions being asked. Is this going to affect access to CEGEP for English eligible or English speaking students if there's a fixed, these are in high demand, right? These CEGEP spots, they're in high demand, and are English speaking students going to have the same access as they had before? to those CEGEP spots. Big question mark. And there's a question around regional CEGEPs. So like Champlain, Lennoxville, for example, who has a huge proportion of Francophone students. Is that gonna stay the same? How is that cap gonna work out across all the institutions? That's, as far as I know, hasn't really been figured out. The third big thing we see with the CEGEP system is that, and this was added ad hoc in committee on the fly, additional courses within English CEGEPs. There is requirement for additional courses in French. The latest, as I understand it, is that in the English CEGEPs, students will have to take, so this is over and above the existing curriculum, which I believe there's French second language requirements, but over and above that, students will have to take 3 courses, so substantive courses that are taught in French, over and above their second language instruction. That was the initial requirement. Then it was softened a bit to say the English eligible students, so the students coming out of English high schools, they can choose, instead of taking 3 substantive courses, they can take 3 additional French instruction courses, so French second language courses. So how that's going to work out in the CEGEP curriculum, I also don't know, but I know that this requirement has caused a lot of concern in certain quarters in terms of student success at the CEGEP level, and also curriculum at the CEGEP level. What's that going to look like? So that new requirement, as I understand it, comes into force next year, so 2024. So watch for that. But I know that that's causing a lot of anxiety. So that's my spiel on CEGEP. So the next bit is the next part of my presentation is what is being done, or what can you do, or what can we do? So I'm going to put my PowerPoint back. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Here's my pep talk. Okay, so what can we do? So lots of things have been done. Lots of things could be done. There's a huge surge in interest in this topic, obviously, and people are looking for ways to engage. So first of all, you're here, you're engaged. There are advocacy opportunities that are happening a lot, all over the place. There's open letters being written. There's op-eds being written. You can write letters to the editor. You can engage politically. You can engage with your local MNA, tell them what you think. All that kind of stuff that can be done at the grassroots level. There's court challenges happening, and I'll go through some of them that are already happening. You can start some, you can join existing ones, you can follow and share news about the ones that are going on. You can support them as well financially. And just generally advocate with your peers, your local MNAs, your municipal reps as well, and engage with organizations as you have done here with EPCA and the QCGN and all kinds of things. So I'm going to back up one slide here and talk about one thing that's particular for parents, which is Section 23 of the Canadian Charter. So Section 23 of the Canadian Charter is the part of the charter that guarantees education in the minority language. So in Quebec, it guarantees the existence of basically English education, and also, the minimum requirements for who has the right to send their kid to school in English. This has been, there's been several constitutional challenges from Quebec based on Section 23 of the Charter over the years. In fact, the very, very first Section 23 challenge was from Quebec and had to do with the eligibility restrictions. There's the Solsky case and the Nguyen case from the early 2000s. And most recently, Bill 21 challenge by the EMSB and the Bill 40 challenge from the Quebec English School Boards Association, which I'll talk about. Those are all based in Section 23 of the Charter. So it's a very powerful and very important part of the Charter for English education in Quebec. It guarantees eligibility, and it also guarantees rights holders, so that's parents, the right to manage and control the minority education. And that's a big piece of it, which has become extremely important in Quebec recently. Good news, Section 23 of the Charter cannot be overridden by the notwithstanding clause. So Bill 96 and Bill 21 are covered by the notwithstanding clause, but that can't touch Section 23. Quebec wishes it could, but it can't. So there's actually some fertile ground for constitutional challenges based in Section 23. And the rights holders, as I said, are, well, the parents and citizens of Canada who have these rights. So it's actually parents directly. So a lot of constitutional challenges that are based in Section 23, the plaintiff in the challenge is a parent of a kid in the system. So that's all of you. You have standing under Section 23. You are empowered, and it's your rights that you are enforcing here. There's my pep talk. So I'll talk about some of the challenges that have been based in Section 23 recently. Another thing I want you to know about in terms of how you can get involved in terms of things like open letters and getting engaged. There's a debate going on at the federal level right now. There's federal legislation that's been tabled. It was actually tabled a year ago today. It's called Bill C-13. It's an overhaul to the Official Languages Act. And it's federal. It's an overhaul to the federal policy on official languages, plural, English and French. The Official Languages Act isn't, as sexy as the Charter of the French Language, but it's really important actually because it recognizes linguistic minorities in every province. So that includes English-speaking Quebec. So it recognizes a place for English-speaking Quebec in the federal policy. C-13 is a big change to federal policy. I can't get into all the details, but it's going to introduce an asymmetry in the federal policy, and it looks like it might put a squeeze on English-speaking Quebec as a minority. Why do I say that? Because it adds in, for the first time, a bunch of references to the Charter of the French Language, which, as we've seen, modified by Bill 96, is somewhat hostile to the existence of English-speaking Quebec, or to the place of English-speaking Quebec. So that's something that, if you are engaging in this area, it's something to watch for. There's an active debate right now on Parliament Hill. The bill's in committee. It's an open question what's going to happen to it. The QCGN's been doing a lot of advocacy around this. In fact, I have a hyperlink to share with you, which I'll try to remember to do when I finish my presentation. But that's something to watch for in terms of what's going on. Also, under the What Can We Do rubric, I know I'm running out of time. I just want to give you some updates. There's a lot going on in the court challenges realm right now. I tried to list them all out. It all started with Bill 21 in 2019. That's been challenged by a number of groups, including the EMSB. And the EMSB's challenge is based in two parts of the Charter. One of them is Section 23 of the Charter. So the idea that English school boards have the right to manage and control things like what their staff wear and don't wear, and that the government cannot interfere with that. So that's pending. The appeal was heard last fall, and we're waiting with bated breath for the judgment. In that case, it's widely expected to go to the Supreme Court after. So watch for that. Next, you've got Bill 40. So as you know, Bill 40 attempted to do away with school boards as we know them and replace them with school service centers. And so that would have done away with really any effective management and control by the English community of its education system. So that was challenged in 2020 by the Quebec English School Boards Association. And that the trial, so they got the stay. So that's why school boards still exist in Quebec in the English system. They got the stay, and the trial was a year and a half ago, and we're still waiting for the trial judgment. So watch for that any day now. Next, we have Bill 96 challenges, and there's a bunch. The first one was launched by the EMSB the day after the bill was adopted in May 2022. So I think I have about 5 on my slide here. The first one, the Ortona, we call the Ortona contestation. That's the EMSB's one. It's called Ortona because he's the first applicant or the first plaintiff in it, but it's also the EMSB itself. And so that started. It's challenging a bunch of things that affect school boards, but it's also challenging some big constitutional issues and some access to justice issues that are dealt with in Bill 96. Another one is what we call the Ravinsky case, which is launched by the Gray Casgrain law firm. It's 2 lawyer plaintiffs and a professor who are the sort of lead plaintiffs there, and it's challenging a bunch of different things in Bill 96. Some overlap with the MSB challenge, but some other stuff as well. The third one is the Mitchell case, which is a much more narrow challenge to some specific things about things in the legal system, pleadings that need to be filed in French. And their strategy was to do a really narrow challenge and get a stay, and they got a stay. So a couple of those provisions of Bill 96 have been stayed, which means they haven't come into effect, just like the Bill 40 provisions. The next one is the Conseil de la Magistrature du Québec. So these are judges of the Cour du Québec who have challenged some provisions of Bill 96 that they say interfere with judicial independence. And that has also been successful in getting a stay. So those provisions have been stopped. They are not going into effect. And then apparently here, there's a 5th one. There's possibly a challenge coming from the city of Côte St. Luc about some of the municipalities provisions. And I don't really know much about that one. We'll see when it comes out. So a lot of these are going to move really slowly through the system because these are big constitutional things, and the Attorney General of Quebec is trying to get them all joined up together. So it's probably going to move slowly. So that's where those are at. There may be new Bill 96 challenges coming. I don't know. But that's what we know so far. And with that, I will conclude my yabbering, and I will definitely welcome your questions.
So I've tried to do, like I said, there was a lot of questions. So what I could answer, I was answering. But a lot of questions around really special needs and what this means. Obviously, this is very dear to my heart. And what measures have been put in place for special needs students who would, in essence, end their education in high school. I mean, I know the answer to that. And so that's one question. So you want to start with that?
So the question is, what measures have been taken to
protect
special needs students?
Yes, and there's been a number of questions about special needs. I'm trying to amalgam basically what's put in place for children with special needs. Are there any derogations? That's the essence of a lot of the questions.
Well, I've read Bill 96 from cover to cover, and there's no mention of special needs students anywhere in Bill 96. So what's happening at the school and school board level? What policies are in place? What exceptions can be made? I don't know, but I can tell you that that's not contemplated in Bill 96 itself.
Yes. So we're fighting very hard. EPCA's fighting very hard for that, just for everybody here to know, but still we don't have any answers. Another question that came up a lot is, when does the 3 years start to count? Is it as soon as the law came in May? I thought it was June, but you're right, May 2022. When does the 3 years start counting for the permits and stuff? When does that, is it when you got the permit? Is when the law came into place?
Oh, I think this is just my recollection, but if I don't want to give out legal advice for particular instances, but my understanding is there's these 3-year permits, people get them. These are temporary permits. So these are not the eligibility certificates. These are temporary exceptional permits for people who are temporary residents. And my understanding is those permits are issued they are 3-year permits. So they used to be 3 years and then renewable. So my understanding is that they would be 3 years and you would get another 3-year renewal kind of thing. And my understanding is now they're simply not renewable. That's as much as I can say. If there's anything more particular someone's wondering about, I would maybe follow up with them after, because I don't have much more detail than that.
So then another question that came in is, if the law has been in effect since 2022, why do we have to wait to see the impact?
To see the impact.
It's a great
A
question.
couple of reasons. First of all, for some of the provisions, they didn't come into effect right away. Some of them came into effect right away. Some of them came into effect 3 months later. Some of them come into effect a year later with the SAGE-UP ones. Some of them come into effect this year, some next year. So some of it is just that it comes into effect in a sort of cascading manner. The other reason, which I was talking about with respect to health and social services, is because that part anticipates that there's going to be some of those specific rules are going to come through regulations and policies, and those policies haven't been made yet, or maybe they have, and I don't know about them, but they weren't made when Bill 96 was passed. So it anticipates, again, for the public service stuff, there would be a whole kind of rollout, which we'd have to monitor to see, okay, this particular ministry, what rules are they going to follow? In this particular ministry, how are they going to roll out these things? And particularly in the health and social services sector, there's a lot of stuff that was supposed to come out in policy and regulation. So that's why I say we have to wait to see the impact. However, that being said, again, we hear stories of things happening either in anticipation of the new rules or under some new rules we don't know. So that's not to say that there hasn't been impacts already. I think there have. So we have to understand those better.
I know the answer to this, but I think it's come up enough times, so I want you to answer. How does the bill affect accessibility to universities in Quebec?
Accessibility to universities. Well, it doesn't change anything about university admissions.
Except,
but of course, pardon me?
Except the R score.
The R score. So that goes to my point about SAGE-UP success, student success. So again, not a direct, not from the law itself, but from the effect of the law. So if students have reduced access to admissions to SAGE-UP, or if they have lower success in SAGE-UP, then that affects obviously their competitiveness for university. So those are the effects that people have been worrying about in terms of access to SAGE-UP and also success in SAGE-UP. But again, we haven't seen those yet because those new restrictions don't come into effect until this year.
Another question that came in that I thought was very interesting. There's so many I'm trying to get around. You mentioned that you can look into the Bill 13 that is being debated in Parliament. Can you elaborate on that and what we can do?
Sure. In fact, this is the perfect time for me to put my little hyperlink into the Q&A. Okay. I'm gonna.
And then we'll do the clarifying of the 17.5% because there's a lot of confusion about that.
Yeah. Can I? Oh no. Okay, I can't.
Somebody already put the link. Somebody already added your hyperlink.
Oh, great. Okay.
Some great volunteer parents put it in.
So C13, the QCGN has a lot of information. They have a website about this. This was the link I was trying to put in, but someone from the QCGN can back me up on this one. But so C13 is an overhaul to the Official Languages Act. It's really interesting to me, and I think it's the first time ever that Quebec's language legislation and the federal legislation are being changed radically at the same time. And so Bill 96 is law. C13 is not yet law. C13 is being debated in Parliament right now. It's a big overhaul to the Official Languages Act. It creates asymmetry, not only in the treatment of English and French, but also in Quebec specifically. It creates a whole special regime for the use of French in federally regulated businesses. So what we're seeing here is a beginning of a fragmentation of federal policy, treating Quebec differently from the other provinces. I could say a lot about C13. I've done a presentation on it, which is also in the QC on YouTube. If you look for C13 and my name and QCGN, I gave a presentation on the substance of C13 as well. So this is really an open opportunity for engagement with the English-speaking community of Quebec to advocate for the interests of English-speaking Quebec in this legislative process. And it's not too late. It's very much it's very much not too late on this one. And as I said, the Official Languages Act, it isn't really as visible in Quebec as the Chart of the French Language, but it really, I've called it the lifeline for English speaking Quebec, because it is the framework for a lot of federal support money and also like political support to the English speaking community of Quebec. For example, the federal government provides a whole bunch of money to the English school system, well, through the Quebec government, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of behind the scenes. You don't notice it, but if the framework changes, you might notice it in the future. The damage, we don't know really what's going to happen, but that it's really important to pay attention to this legislative process as it's happening and engage and make your voice heard in this one.
So a lot of questions in the chat about how parents can be more involved. I'm just gonna, and what can be done, any open letters. Like we said at the beginning of this webinar, please follow the QCGN, follow them on Facebook and sign up on their website for their newsletter. The same thing, sign up for EPCA's newsletter and follow us on Facebook. We do these kinds of surveys, we do these kinds of open letters. And of course, the more people that sign them, the more weight they give and the more power we have to make statements. So I just wanted to say that because there's a lot of questions. Now back to what you were saying, can you please clarify the 17.5%? There's a lot of confusion. So parents are like, how do I know if my kid coming from English school is in that 17.5%? So let's just make it clear what we talk about when we talk about the 17.5%.
Okay, right. Okay, I'll do my best. I hope I get it right. Okay, I'm going to go back to my notes so I can get it right. Okay. So, institutions are designated as English speaking or French speaking. For the English speaking institutions overall, my understanding from Bill 96 is that enrollment, so spots in those institutions, will be capped at 17.5% of all SAGEP spots in the whole SAGEP system. It's a bit of an arbitrary number. The point is, what's happened is the English institutions have been getting really high demand, not only from English speaking students, but Francophone students too. And we see Dawson College expanding and the numbers ballooning, right? And so the idea here is to stop that growth from continuing by capping overall enrollment in English language SAGEPs overall. So that doesn't make any distinction between whether you're from the English system or the French system. It's just like overall, these SAGEPs can accept no more than X number of thousand students total. So that's what's in Bill 96. But Bill 96 also says that individual English language SAGEPs are supposed to give priority in admissions for basically students coming from English high schools or English eligible students. But what's not clear at all in Bill 96, and what has never been clear to anyone I've spoken to, is how that is supposed to work. How are English SAGEPs supposed to give priority in admissions to English students? What does that mean? Are there a certain number of spots reserved for English students? Or how are they compared to everyone else applying? It's not clear at all. It wasn't clear when I was talking, a year ago with stakeholders in the education sector. I don't know if it's clearer today. I don't know if SAGEPs have started to formulate these policies and what they look like. So it's not a it's not a quota for English students or French students. It's not a clear restriction on the number of English students or the number of French students who can attend. It's an overall enrollment cap for the entire institution. And then it's at the institution level where they're supposed to give priority in admissions. That's all I know.
Okay. A lot of questions. I think we have time for a couple of more questions. I don't know what to pick. There's a lot of very specific questions that, I guess would depend on people's situations, but a lot about the work permits. People are confused about when does that start? Does it, like, again, a lot of those questions about when does it start? If I have it already, does my kid, and it's ending in 2 years, but you've answered that already, right? It doesn't matter. It's just that those won't be renewed, correct?
At a high level, that's my understanding, but I can't opine on like a specific instance of a specific person because I don't have the specific information. I'd have to look at it. So I don't want to give anyone sort of, legal advice on their situation, but overall, that's my understanding of how the system works.
So questions about eligibility: if both parents have English eligibility and all 3 kids have gone to French immersion in English school boards, let's say the Lester B. Pearson School Board, automatically have eligibility, or do they have to apply?
So kids who are already in the system?
So they already have, they are automatically have. If you're in an English public school, you cannot attend English public school in Quebec if you don't have a certificate of eligibility. You just can't. However, a lot of questions about my child is in a French school. I had eligibility, but I don't have a certificate.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. So
So that's an interesting one. So there are thousands and thousands of people in Quebec who could attend English school, who would be eligible, but who have not applied for a certificate of eligibility because they are going to a French school. Their parents have chosen to send them to French school or to a private unsubsidized English school that doesn't require an eligibility certificate. So there's a sort of latent group of people that are legally eligible, but don't actually have a certificate of eligibility for whatever reason. And so how would you get your certificate of eligibility if you're not in the English system? Because my understanding is those certificates are issued by either the ministry or the school boards.
So what you do is,
problem.
So what you do is you go to your school board and you apply through it there, but don't wait. Don't wait, don't wait. Don't wait to do it. You have to do it because, it takes a really long time to get them. So it's not a guarantee that you'll get them in time. These are some of the things we're hearing. So don't wait, apply for them right away. You go see the school board in the district that you're living and you apply for your English eligibility. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to do both answer and so there's 3 minutes. What other questions should we answer? I don't know. This is so overwhelming. There's like 68 questions. I'm completely overwhelmed. So questions about eligibility, a lot of questions about CJEP, a lot of things to say. So basically, what can we do? Let's just end with this. What can people do? Let's just end with what can they do again? One more time.
Okay. Well, so as I said, there's advocacy that the QCGN is doing right now, including an open letter on C13. There may be advocacy that EPCA is up to. So engage with that. Get on mailing lists. Follow these institutions on Twitter,
on Facebook, and
perhaps Facebook, Twitter, engaged.
Perhaps somebody from the QCGN could drop a link, please, because I can't find it right now, to sign up for your newsletter. I've done it for EPCA, but if somebody from the QCGN can just write that in the Q&A, that would be great. So parents are asking for this. That would be great. So I think that's it. There's a lot more questions. There's a lot of questions.
Well, maybe while you're finding one last question, maybe I'll reiterate other things you can do. So at the school board level or at the school level, at the municipal level, with your MNA, writing letters, getting together with groups of people and writing letters, organizing information sessions. There's a lot of questions. Get together, organize information sessions, network with your counterparts in other parts of the province. And stay current on the court challenges. There's a whole side of things in terms of supporting court challenges. Consider joining or starting some. That's a possibility. You are rights holders. So those are all things that come to mind. And one last question.
One last question. If my kid has a certificate but goes to French school, can her children get the certificates as well, or will they lose them? So that came up many times.
So it has to do with whether the parent was educated in English in Canada, and if either parent. So you could marry someone who is educated in English in Canada, and then your kids would be eligible. So you have to know the rules, because it is possible to lose eligibility over generations. And it's hard to get it back in Quebec.
So what you're saying is, if you have eligibility and your children, they could have had eligibility, but then you chose to send them to French school, they could lose it, is what you're saying.
Their kids could potentially not be eligible. There's a lot of coulds and shoulds and ifs in there. It's not absolute, but yes, that's something to really work through when you make those decisions.
Yes, and also to just get your certificates and just have them. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think Riley's going to come on and give the closing message. Riley? Or I can, but I thought that was Riley's job. So I guess I can. Thank you very much, Marianne, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it. It was very, very informative. Thank you for your time. And thank you to all the parents that came. Oh, and there's Riley. He's coming on. He'll have other things to say, I think. But thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Yeah, and it was just so informative. Riley?
Thank you. I'm so sorry to steal your thunder like that. Hi, everyone. My name is Riley Delasfine. I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the Quebec Community Groups Network. And on behalf of the QCGN, I would just like to say thank you all very much, first of all, for being here tonight. But more importantly, as someone with young children in the English school system, and as someone who has very recently started to discover the incredible community that's available to parents through our children's schools, I'd like to say how heartening and encouraging it is to see all of you here tonight on a Wednesday night at 8:00 in the evening, right in the middle of March break, for those of you in the regions, or certain regions anyway. It's no easy feat, and I know that many of you have given up, some of your time to be with us tonight. And I also know that the reason many of you are here is because you're nervous and concerned and a little bit scared about Bill 96, and I am too. And it's been a very frightening few years for the English-speaking community. There's a lot to be hopeful for. And the first thing that comes to mind when I try to answer that sentence is thank goodness for Catherine Korakakis. No, really, I've gotten to know Catherine quite a bit over the last few years. She's a tireless advocate. She's someone who fights tooth and nail day and night to make sure that parents and families have a seat at the table and a voice in this discussion. And I think we're all very lucky to have someone like her on our side. I want to say thank you to Marion Sandilands for being here today. Marion, who know that more than any other person I know, has found the devil in the details when it comes to Bill 96, and has spent the last few years really explaining the bill in such a way that it makes sense to even me, and that even I can understand just what is so harmful about this legislation. The QCGN is there. I won't repeat what's been said about our initiatives. Safe to say that we are there, and we are continuing to fight. We fought Bill 96 long before it became law, and we continue to do so 8-9 months after its adoption of the National Assembly, and we continue to look for every avenue to protect our rights and the rights of English speakers. But most importantly, I want to come back to the fact that everybody is here tonight, and then the fact that we all took time on an evening long after many people have, perhaps forgotten about Bill 96 or accepted it as a part of life. We're continuing to get together, and we're continuing to explore how we can act collectively to protect our community's vitality. So I want to say how grateful I am to be part of a community like this. I would encourage you to take a look at some of those links in the chat. We will certainly be sharing this recording with you very soon. Certainly before the end of the week. It should also be made available on the QCGN's YouTube channel. Follow QCGN, follow EPCA, and continue to stay tuned as we keep taking this journey forward. So thank you again and have a great night.